He is
Everyone
trapped in the
refused to save the
canyon.
abandoned,
If we don't
paralyzed
hurry,
woman,
he
except
won't
this
survive the
carpenter.
night.
In a small town, where the streets were narrow and lined with old houses, life seemed simple for most people. Everyone knew each other, and the rhythm of daily life was steady. Children ran to school, merchants opened their shops, and villagers greeted each other warmly in passing. But at the very edge of this town, beyond the reach of the busy streets and the chatter of neighbors, there stood an old, crumbling house that seemed to have been forgotten by time itself. The walls were cracked, the windows were dusty, and the roof sagged in places as if it could collapse at any moment. This house was home to an elderly woman who had been living there alone for many years. The woman's name was Mariam. She had not always been alone. Years ago, she had lived with her family, sharing her days with laughter, conversations, and the ordinary comfort of companionship. But life had changed her circumstances abruptly. A terrible accident had left her paralyzed from the waist down. She could no longer walk, move freely, or do the simplest tasks for herself. Over time, her family had grown distant. Some left because they could not handle the responsibility of caring for her, and others had moved to distant cities in search of better opportunities. Slowly, one by one, she found herself completely alone. Living alone as a paralyzed person was never easy, especially in a society where people often turned away from problems that did not concern them. Mariam had learned the hard way that survival was not just about physical strength, but also about patience, endurance, and hope. Her days began early, even though most of her mornings were filled with struggle. She could not get out of bed on her own, so she had to find ways to adjust herself, move her hands to reach food or water, and manage her basic needs as best as she could. Each day was a test of resilience. She had learned to ration her food carefully, gather water from the well nearby, and keep her small home from falling into complete disrepair. But even with all her effort, life was lonely, and the absence of human touch, care, or companionship weighed heavily on her spirit. People in the town had known about Mariam for years. Some remembered her as a lively woman, full of energy, who had once participated in festivals, helped neighbors with chores, and smiled easily. But over time, as her situation worsened and she became more dependent on others, the town slowly began to ignore her. Children who used to play outside her home ran past without saying hello. Neighbors avoided her gaze, pretending not to notice her cries for help. Whenever she called for assistance, most people found excuses. Some said they were busy, others feared that helping her would be too difficult or troublesome. Some whispered that she had brought misfortune upon herself, though none of it was true. The town, as a whole, had developed a culture of indifference toward her suffering. Mariam often spent hours looking out of her broken window, watching the villagers go about their day. She noticed how they laughed together, helped each other, and shared food and stories. She longed for a simple conversation, a smile, or a gesture of kindness. But in the midst of all the life around her, she remained invisible. At night, when the town lights dimmed and silence covered the streets, she would sometimes cry quietly into her pillow. Her tears were not only for the pain in her body, but also for the loneliness that had become a constant companion. Yet, even in these moments of sadness, she never completely gave up hope. She believed that somewhere someone might see her suffering, someone who would act not because they had to, but because they were kind. The seasons passed, each bringing its own challenges. Summers were harsh, with scorching sun that made her room unbearably hot. Winters were cold and cruel, and she had to wrap herself in old, tattered blankets to survive. Rainy days were the hardest. Water often leaked through the roof, and she had to move herself carefully to avoid getting wet. She learned to adapt to each season, finding small ways to make life more bearable. She moved objects around, kept her few belongings organized, and tried to maintain a sense of dignity despite her physical limitations. Despite all her struggles, Mariam's spirit was not entirely broken. She had a small journal where she wrote her thoughts, memories, and dreams. Sometimes, she wrote letters she never sent, imagining what she would say to someone who might help her. In these writings, she expressed her fears, her hopes, and her longing for human connection. She remembered moments from her past times when she had walked freely, laughed with friends, and felt the warmth of a hug. These memories kept her going. They reminded her that life had once been good and could perhaps be good again if someone chose to care. While most of the town had turned away, there were occasional moments of faint kindness. A child might bring her flowers, or a neighbor might drop a piece of bread outside her door. But these acts were rare and fleeting. They were not enough to change her situation or relieve the deep sense of abandonment she felt. The town had collectively decided to avoid her suffering, and she was left to fend for herself. Each day, she grew weaker, and yet she continued to hope. She hoped that the right person, the person who would see her as human and worthy of help, would come along. In this forgotten corner of the town, Mariam's life was quiet, lonely, and filled with challenges that few could imagine. But there was a spark inside her, a determination to survive despite the odds. She knew she could not rely on most people, but she still believed in the possibility of kindness. Little did she know that soon, someone would appear, a person whose compassion and courage would change her life completely. This person would see her not as a burden, but as a human being in need of care, and his actions would prove that even in a world full of indifference, hope and humanity could still prevail. Days turned into weeks, and the quiet misery of Mariam's life became even harder to bear. The small acts of kindness that had occasionally reached her door were becoming less frequent, and sometimes they vanished entirely. The once faint glimmer of hope she held started to flicker under the weight of constant neglect. Food was no longer easily available. The bread she relied on from a kind shopkeeper was now scarce, and water from the nearby well required effort that seemed unbearable on her own. Every day, she faced the challenge of managing her most basic needs, from staying clean to moving herself slightly to prevent bed sores. Her home, already old and fragile, continued to fall apart around her. The roof leaked in several places, the windows let in cold drafts during winter, and the walls had cracks that widened every time a storm hit. Mariam's situation was so visible that anyone passing by could see it. Yet, most villagers avoided her home. Some whispered about her condition, some looked away, and some hurried past as if they hadn't noticed her. Occasionally, someone would glance at her through the broken window, but fear, laziness, or simple indifference stopped them from helping. "It's not my problem," they would say quietly to themselves. "It's too difficult. Let someone else do it." And so, Mariam remained trapped in her own home, watching life move on without her. Even though the villagers refused to help, Mariam's spirit had not completely faded. She tried to make sense of their behavior, reminding herself that not everyone was cruel. Perhaps they were scared, she thought, or perhaps they simply did not know how to help. She told herself that one day someone would come, a person who could see her suffering and would choose to act. And in the meantime, she did what she could to survive. One rainy afternoon, the situation became even more difficult. The rain had been falling steadily for hours, seeping through the roof and dripping onto the floor. Mariam tried to move herself to a drier spot, but her paralyzed body made even small movements a struggle. She used an old cloth to soak up the water that had gathered on the floor and tried to cover herself with blankets to keep warm. Each task, no matter how small, felt exhausting. Yet, even in the midst of pain and discomfort, she continued to think about hope. She believed that someone would notice her plight and act. It was during this time that the story introduces the carpenter. His name was Imran, a young man who had grown up in the town. Imran was known for his honesty, hard work, and quiet demeanor. Unlike many of the villagers, He was not interested in gossip or judgment. He believed in helping others, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. Imran had heard whispers about Mariam's condition long ago, but like everyone else, he had not acted immediately. He was busy with his work, repairing furniture and making a living, yet he could not completely ignore her suffering. Over time, her situation became harder to ignore. Unlike other villagers, Imran did not feel disgust or fear when he thought about helping Mariam. Instead, he felt a growing sense of responsibility. He knew that even small efforts could make a difference. Sometimes he would glance toward her home while passing by, noticing the leaking roof or the broken window. He wondered how someone could live in such conditions, alone and paralyzed. And each time he wondered, he felt a tug at his heart that reminded him of his own humanity. Meanwhile, Mariam's days continued to be filled with struggle. She tried to stretch her arms, move her hands, and make small adjustments to ease the pain in her body. She remembered times when she could walk freely, visit the market, and help others. Those memories brought both comfort and sadness. She often closed her eyes and imagined a world where someone would come to her aid, where she would feel the warmth of care again. But when she opened her eyes, the empty room reminded her of the harsh reality. She was alone, and help seemed distant. As the days passed, the situation worsened. Mariam began to feel weak and exhausted. Simple tasks that she had managed on her own became impossible. She could no longer lift even a small cup of water without difficulty. Her body was crying out for assistance, but the town's indifference was deafening. Many villagers passed by her house, seeing the situation, yet they did not stop. They were busy with their own lives, ignoring the silent cries coming from the edge of their town. Mariam often wondered why people could be so uncaring, and yet she never let anger consume her. Instead, she held on to hope, believing that there was at least one person out there who could see her suffering as something worth acting on. During this time, small glimpses of Imran's attention became more noticeable. He did not announce his concern to the town, nor did he tell anyone that he was thinking of helping. Instead, he quietly observed the situation, taking mental notes of what Mariam might need. He noticed how she struggled to reach the corner of her room, how her blankets were thin and old, and how the leaking roof made her evenings unbearable. He thought about what he could do to improve her condition, even with the limited resources he had. The more he observed, the stronger his resolve became. One evening, Imran decided to take a small step. He gathered some old blankets from his home and brought them to Mariam's doorstep. He left them carefully so she could reach them without much difficulty. The next morning, Mariam noticed the blankets. She could not believe her eyes. For the first time in weeks, she felt that someone had cared enough to act. She held the blankets close, tears filling her eyes, and whispered a quiet thank you into the empty room. It was a small gesture, but for Mariam, it was monumental. It reminded her that she was not completely invisible, that kindness could still reach her, even in a town that had largely turned away. This small act sparked a subtle change in Mariam's days. She felt a little stronger knowing that someone had thought of her. She began to prepare for the possibility that someone like Imran could take further steps. Meanwhile, Imran, seeing the impact of his small effort, felt encouraged. He realized that helping Mariam was not as impossible as it seemed. Even small acts of care could make a difference, and the thought of leaving her in suffering was something he could not accept. However, the challenge remained. Caring for a paralyzed person was not simple. It required time, effort, and constant attention. Imran knew this, yet he was determined. He understood that while the town had failed Mariam, he could succeed where others had not. He also realized that helping her could inspire others, showing them that even small acts of compassion could change a life. And so, a plan began to form in his mind. He would not wait for others to act. He would take responsibility step by step, ensuring that Mariam received the care she desperately needed. For Mariam, hope began to grow. She felt a quiet anticipation, imagining that someone could truly help her, not just with blankets or food, but with consistent care and compassion. She thought about the possibility of being able to live with dignity again, of having someone to talk to assist her, and to make her feel valued. This hope became a light in her otherwise lonely and difficult days, giving her the strength to endure each moment. As days continued, the stage was set for something greater. Mariam's trust in humanity, fragile as it was, began to rebuild. Imran's quiet determination to help set in motion events that would soon transform her life. The struggle was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, Mariam felt that she might not face it alone. The presence of even one kind soul was enough to change everything. The days that followed were tense, filled with anticipation, fear, and quiet determination. Mariam's life had slowly begun to change, but her situation was still fragile. She was weak, confined to her bed, and entirely dependent on others. Even the small gestures of kindness she had received had not solved the underlying problems. Her home was still leaking, her food supplies were limited, and she lacked the medical care that her condition desperately required. Yet there was a new element in her life now, hope, born from the small act of kindness the carpenter, Imran, had shown her. Imran had spent days thinking carefully about how he could help Mariam without overwhelming himself or putting her in danger. He knew that lifting her, cleaning her room, and bringing her food would require strength and careful planning. Most people in the town would never even consider such effort, yet Imran did not think twice. He believed that helping someone in need was not a matter of convenience. It was a matter of human decency. Each day, he watched Mariam through the small window, noting her struggles, her movements, and the little things she needed most. Slowly, he began to form a plan that would ensure she was not just surviving, but living with dignity again. One rainy evening, when the sky was dark and the wind howled outside, Imran finally made his move. He gathered a bag with essential supplies, food, clean blankets, warm clothes, and simple medical items that could help Mariam manage her condition. His heart was heavy with the knowledge of the challenge ahead, but he was determined. He walked carefully along the narrow streets to her home, the rain soaking his clothes, but he did not let the discomfort slow him down. He understood that time was critical. Mariam's frail body could not endure much longer without proper care. When Imran reached her house, he found Mariam struggling to reach the corner of her room to protect herself from the leaking roof. Her eyes widened when she saw him standing there, drenched and holding the bag. She tried to speak, but her voice was weak and almost lost in the sound of the rain. Imran knelt beside her bed and smiled gently. "Don't worry, I'm here to help," he said softly. Mariam's heart filled with a mix of relief, surprise, and disbelief. She had waited for help for so long that seeing someone arrive in person, willing to care for her, felt almost unreal. Imran carefully began to assess her needs. He helped her sit up slightly so he could check the condition of her bed, her blankets, and her small room. The more he looked, the more he realized the extent of neglect and hardship she had endured. The walls were damp, the furniture broken, and her few possessions were scattered and dusty. Yet Imran did not hesitate or complain. Instead, he rolled up his sleeves and began working methodically, fixing what he could, arranging her things neatly, and ensuring she was comfortable. Every movement he made was deliberate, showing care, patience, and a deep respect for her dignity. For Mariam, the experience was almost overwhelming. Tears filled her eyes as she watched someone take the effort to care for her so thoroughly. She had grown so used to being ignored that the presence of a compassionate person was both shocking and comforting. For the first time in years, she felt seen, valued, and understood. She realized that Imran was not just providing physical help. He was offering emotional support, a connection that she had been missing desperately. The next days were filled with hard work, patience, and adjustment. Imran visited Maryam daily, sometimes more than once, to ensure she had food, water, and a clean space to live in. He carried heavy buckets of water, repaired broken furniture, and cleaned the small house from top to bottom. Each task was physically demanding, but he did not allow fatigue to weaken his resolve. He understood that every small effort mattered and that consistent care could bring stability to Maryam's life. As he worked, Maryam began to share her story with him. She spoke of her past life, of the accident that had paralyzed her, and of the loneliness that had followed. She described how neighbors had avoided her, how family members had left, and how she had struggled to survive on her own. Imran listened quietly, never interrupting, never judging. His presence alone offered a sense of comfort that words could not. Maryam found herself talking more freely than she had in years, feeling that someone truly cared about her experiences and her feelings. Imran also noticed how fragile her health had become. He realized that without proper attention, Maryam could face serious medical complications. He began to research simple remedies and daily routines that could help her manage her condition. He made sure she was moved carefully to avoid bed sores, prepared nutritious meals, and ensured that she stayed warm during cold nights. Each action was a small victory, a step toward improving her quality of life. Yet, the journey was not without challenges. Some villagers noticed Imran's efforts and mocked him quietly, saying that helping Maryam was pointless or beneath him. Others expressed skepticism, wondering why he would spend so much time on someone unworthy of attention. But Imran did not waver. He knew that true kindness did not seek approval or recognition. His motivation came from the simple understanding that every human being deserved care, dignity, and compassion. Over time, Maryam began to show signs of improvement, not physically in terms of walking or moving, but emotionally and mentally. She smiled more often, laughed softly, and engaged in small conversations with Imran. Her trust in people slowly returned, and she began to believe that life could still hold moments of joy despite her condition. The bond between them strengthened as they spent long hours together, working, talking, and sharing stories. Imran's dedication became a source of inspiration for Maryam, showing her that hope could still exist even in the darkest circumstances. One particularly stormy night highlighted the depth of Imran's commitment. A heavy downpour had caused water to flood Maryam's home, and the old roof threatened to collapse in one corner. Imran arrived just in time, carrying buckets to remove water and using old boards to stabilize the roof temporarily. Maryam watched in awe as he worked tirelessly, soaked to the bone, yet determined to protect her and her home. That night, she understood fully that Imran's care was not a fleeting gesture but a profound commitment to her well-being. As the days continued, Imran's presence transformed the environment of Maryam's home. What had once been a place of neglect and despair slowly became a space of safety and comfort. Blankets were clean, food was regularly available, and small repairs made the home livable again. Maryam's confidence in herself and in others grew. She no longer feared each day as a struggle to survive, but began to look forward to the moments when Imran would arrive, bringing not just care, but also warmth, understanding, and companionship. During this period, Imran also began to inspire subtle changes in a few villagers. Some noticed his dedication and quietly wondered why they had ignored Maryam for so long. They began to question their own behavior, realizing that kindness and compassion were not as difficult as they had imagined. While most of the town remained indifferent, the seed of empathy had been planted in a few hearts, thanks to one man's unwavering commitment. For Maryam, the experience was life-changing. She understood that she was no longer alone, that someone could see her worth and choose to act. The carpenter's actions were not just about repairing a home or bringing food. They were about restoring her dignity, proving that even in a world filled with indifference, human connection and kindness could triumph. By the end of this part of her journey, Mariam had learned an important truth. One person's courage and compassion could overcome the neglect of many. Imran's determination had not only improved her physical conditions, but had rekindled her hope, giving her the strength to face each day with resilience. She realized that while suffering could isolate a person, genuine care could break that isolation, creating a bond that restored faith in humanity. The days that followed Imran's arrival at Mariam's home were both challenging and transformative. While her life had begun to improve in small ways, the path to stability was still filled with obstacles. Caring for a paralyzed woman was not an easy task, and the challenges Imran faced tested both his physical strength and his patience. Each day required meticulous attention to Mariam's needs, from preparing her meals to ensuring her hygiene and safety. The more he invested himself in her care, the more he realized how deep the neglect had been and how much work was required to restore a sense of normalcy to her life. Mariam herself faced a mix of relief and vulnerability. She had become accustomed to being alone, to surviving day by day without assistance. Now, with Imran's constant care, she had to relearn the experience of depending on someone. It was both comforting and humbling. She could feel his strength and dedication, but she also feared becoming a burden. Each time he lifted her or adjusted her position to prevent bed sores, she would apologize quietly, though Imran always reassured her that helping her was not a burden. It was a responsibility he had chosen willingly. Imran's efforts were tireless. Early in the mornings, he would fetch fresh water, prepare meals, and clean the small room. Throughout the day, he would repair broken furniture, patch the leaky roof, and move heavy items to ensure her safety. Every action, no matter how small, was performed with care. For Mariam, these acts were not just practical help. They were proof that someone truly cared, someone who saw her as a human being worthy of compassion. The daily routines gradually brought stability to her life, and with that stability came a renewed sense of hope. Despite these improvements, challenges remained. Some neighbors continued to judge and mock Imran quietly, whispering that helping Mariam was a waste of time or a foolish endeavor. They did not understand his motivations and were unable to see the humanity behind his actions. Others remained indifferent, avoiding the house and pretending nothing was happening. Yet Imran did not let their attitudes discourage him. He focused on what he could control, Mariam's well-being, and ignored the negativity around him. His persistence became a quiet lesson in courage and resilience, showing that true kindness does not rely on approval or recognition. Mariam, meanwhile, was slowly adjusting to the new rhythm of her life. She began to trust Imran more each day, sharing stories of her past, her fears, and her hopes for the future. She spoke of her childhood, her family, and the accident that had changed her life forever. She described the long years of loneliness and neglect, the nights spent crying quietly, and the small moments of fleeting hope that had kept her going. Imran listened patiently, offering not just physical care, but emotional support as well. The bond that developed between them became a source of strength for both, a reminder that human connection could heal wounds that time alone could not. One of the most difficult challenges came during a particularly harsh winter. The cold seeped into Mariam's home through cracks in the walls and gaps in the roof. Blankets were insufficient, and heating was nearly impossible with the limited resources available. Imran worked tirelessly to find solutions, using whatever materials he could gather to insulate the room. He carried warm water, prepared nourishing meals, and ensured that Mariam stayed as comfortable as possible. The cold was relentless, Yet neither of them gave in to despair. Instead, they faced it together, finding small victories in the warmth of human care and determination. As the days passed, Mariam began to show signs of emotional and psychological recovery. She smiled more often, laughed softly at Imran's quiet jokes, and engaged in conversations with him that she had long thought impossible. Her body might still have been confined to the bed, but her spirit began to regain strength. She found herself looking forward to Imran's visits, not only for the care he provided, but for the companionship and understanding he offered. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of security, a feeling that someone was watching over her and that she was no longer completely alone. During this time, small changes began to appear in the attitudes of a few villagers. They observed Imran's dedication from a distance and started to question their own behavior. Some wondered why they had ignored Mariam for so long, realizing that their fear, laziness, or judgment had contributed to her suffering. While most of the town remained indifferent, these small sparks of empathy signaled the potential for broader change. Imran's quiet determination was setting an example, demonstrating that courage and kindness could challenge the indifference of society. One particularly challenging day highlighted the depth of Imran's commitment. Heavy rain had caused water to flood Mariam's home, threatening her safety and comfort. Imran arrived quickly, carrying buckets to remove the water and using boards to prevent further leaks. His clothes were soaked, and his hands were raw from the effort, but he continued without complaint. Mariam watched him, overwhelmed by gratitude and disbelief. For the first time in her life, she realized that someone could be completely selfless, dedicating time, energy, and care without expecting anything in return. The storm outside seemed to mirror the storm of her past suffering, yet Imran's actions provided a shelter stronger than any roof, a shelter built from compassion, patience, and unwavering dedication. Over time, the environment of Mariam's home transformed. The leaky roof was patched, the walls reinforced, and the broken furniture repaired. Clean blankets and warm clothing became a regular feature of her life. The small house, once a symbol of neglect and despair, slowly became a place of safety and comfort. Mariam's confidence grew, and with it, her willingness to trust others. She began to feel that life could hold moments of happiness and care, despite her physical limitations. Imran's dedication had not only improved her living conditions, but had restored her faith in humanity. Yet the journey was ongoing. Caring for Mariam required constant attention, and Imran faced fatigue, exhaustion, and the occasional discouragement of being misunderstood by others. Still, he persevered, understanding that the rewards of compassion were greater than the difficulties of the work itself. Each small improvement in Mariam's life became a triumph, a reminder that persistent kindness could overcome years of neglect and abandonment. Through this period, Mariam began to reflect deeply on her life and the meaning of human connection. She realized that her suffering, while immense, had also prepared her to appreciate acts of kindness more fully. The bond with Imran taught her that one person's courage and compassion could outweigh the indifference of many. She no longer viewed her situation as hopeless. Instead, she saw it as a challenge that could be met with care, determination, and hope. By the end of this period, both Mariam and Imran had undergone transformation. Mariam's health and spirit had improved, and she had regained a sense of dignity and hope that she had long thought impossible. Imran had strengthened his own resilience, witnessing firsthand the impact that dedicated care and empathy could have on a human life. Together, they had created a small world of safety, compassion, and trust, a world that proved that even in a society filled with neglect, kindness could flourish and change lives. The story of these days serves as a powerful reminder that challenges, no matter how daunting, can be overcome through patience, courage, and unwavering dedication. While Miriam's journey was far from complete, she had already experienced the profound difference that one compassionate person could make. The lessons of these days, the triumph of empathy over indifference, the restoration of hope in the face of despair, and the strength of human connection, would remain with her forever. The months that followed marked a significant change in Miriam's life. Her days, once filled with fear, loneliness, and struggle, had begun to gain structure, hope, and comfort. With Imran's consistent care, the small house at the edge of the village was no longer a place of despair. The broken furniture had been repaired, the leaking roof patched, and the damp walls gradually replaced with sturdier materials. Blankets and clothes were clean, and nourishing meals arrived daily. For the first time in many years, Miriam felt that her home was safe, her life valued, and her existence acknowledged. But the transformation went beyond physical improvements. The emotional impact of Imran's dedication was profound. Miriam's spirit, which had once been weighed down by years of neglect, was now lighter. She smiled more often, laughed softly when Imran shared stories or jokes, and even began to speak of her dreams and hopes for the future. She had learned to trust again, and that trust was a gift she had long thought impossible to receive. The bond between them had grown strong, built on patience, understanding, and the quiet certainty that Imran's care was genuine and unwavering. As Miriam's condition stabilized, the presence of other villagers became more noticeable. Some had started to see the changes Imran had brought about. Whispers of curiosity and amazement circulated among them. They noticed the small house that had once symbolized neglect and isolation, now standing as a testament to care and perseverance. Some began to question their earlier indifference. How had they turned away from someone so clearly in need? What had they missed by refusing to act? While most still avoided direct involvement, the seed of empathy had been planted in a few hearts, showing that one person's courage could slowly influence a community. Imran, for his part, remained humble and focused. He did not seek recognition, nor did he expect gratitude beyond the simple acknowledgement of Miriam's needs. His motivation was rooted in the understanding that human life, no matter how vulnerable, deserved compassion and dignity. Each day he continued to tend to her needs, moving her carefully to prevent sores, preparing warm food, ensuring her hygiene, and repairing any damages to her home. Even small tasks, such as adjusting her position in bed or bringing her a glass of water, were approached with care and patience, as if each gesture were a message that she mattered. Miriam, aware of the depth of his commitment, often reflected on how drastically her life had changed. She remembered the long years of abandonment, the nights filled with fear and tears, and the countless times she had hoped for someone to intervene. Now she was living proof that even in the darkest circumstances, hope could endure. Imran's unwavering presence had not only provided her with physical comfort, but had restored her faith in humanity. She began to see life through a lens of gratitude, appreciating even the smallest moments of care, warmth, and companionship. One of the most significant changes was the emotional bond that had grown between them. Miriam felt safe to share her past experiences, the struggles, the pain, and the loneliness she had endured. She spoke of the accident that had paralyzed her, of family members who had abandoned her, and of the indifference she had faced from the community. Imran listened attentively, offering not only practical assistance but also emotional support. In return, Miriam learned to trust another person deeply, a trust that had been absent for decades. Their relationship became a mutual source of strength, each providing courage and hope to the other. As the seasons changed, Miriam's life began to regain some rhythm. Winters were no longer a time of fear and cold. The house was insulated, and blankets and warm meals ensured she remained comfortable. Summers, which once brought unbearable heat, were now manageable with small adjustments and Imran's careful attention. Even rainy days, which had previously been a source of danger and discomfort, were no longer a threat. Imran's consistent efforts had transformed her home into a sanctuary, a place where she could feel secure despite her physical limitations. The town, though slow to change, could not remain completely indifferent. News of Imran's dedication spread quietly, inspiring a few villagers to reconsider their actions. Some began offering small gestures of support, bringing food or water occasionally, though they still hesitated to take direct responsibility. Even so, their awareness marked a subtle but important shift. The lesson was clear. One person's courage and kindness could challenge the prevailing indifference of society, planting seeds of empathy even where it had been absent for years. Mariam's personal growth was as remarkable as her improved circumstances. She began to engage with life in ways she had long thought impossible. She laughed, reminisced about happier times, and even began to dream of activities she could do despite her physical limitations. With Imran's support, she explored hobbies that brought her joy, writing in her journal, crafting small items, and connecting with the world outside her window. Each day became a testament to resilience, showing that even after years of suffering, a person could regain dignity, hope, and purpose. The relationship between Mariam and Imran became an example of the transformative power of compassion. It showed that one person's commitment could not only save a life but also restore faith in humanity. Mariam had once been abandoned, invisible to the world around her. Now she was seen, valued, and cared for with patience and love. Imran's actions reminded her, and anyone who heard their story, that true kindness requires neither recognition nor reward. It exists simply because it is the right thing to do. Eventually, Mariam's story reached the ears of a few influential villagers. They witnessed the changes Imran had brought to her life and were struck by the contrast to the neglect she had suffered for so long. Some quietly approached Imran to learn about his methods, hoping to understand how they could also help others in need. Others expressed regret for their earlier indifference, acknowledging the pain they had contributed to through their inaction. The ripple effect of Imran's compassion was spreading slowly but surely, proving that courage and empathy could influence not just one life, but an entire community. Through all of this, Mariam remained humble and grateful. She often reflected on the years of suffering and the sudden transformation brought about by one man's determination. She realized that life had not abandoned her completely. Rather, it had tested her patience, endurance, and faith in humanity. Imran's presence had provided her not only with physical support, but also with hope and emotional resilience. She understood that her life, though changed dramatically by suffering, had been enriched by the power of human connection and empathy. As time passed, Mariam's health remained stable, and she continued to live with dignity and comfort. Imran, though exhausted at times, remained committed to her care, driven by the understanding that every act of compassion mattered. Together, they had created a small world of safety, warmth, and trust, proving that even in a society filled with neglect and indifference, one person could make an extraordinary difference. The story concludes with a powerful life lesson. Human kindness has the power to transform lives. Mariam, once abandoned and forgotten, had regained her sense of dignity, hope, and trust through the selfless actions of one man. Imran's dedication demonstrated that courage and empathy could overcome years of neglect, and that the impact of a single individual could extend far beyond the immediate act of care. Mariam's journey stands as a reminder that while suffering and neglect exist in the world, hope, compassion, and human connection can restore not only a person's life, but also their faith in humanity. Ultimately, Mariam's story is one of resilience, courage, and the enduring power of empathy. She had faced abandonment, physical challenges, and societal indifference, yet she survived and thrived with the help of one compassionate soul. Her life, once defined by struggle, was transformed by consistent care, kindness, and unwavering dedication. The bond between Maryam and Imran proved that true humanity is measured not by what we receive, but by what we give to those in need.